What if saving a stranger's child cost you everything? Your job, your future, your daughter's only hope. Daniel Mercer made that choice in a heartbeat, never knowing the little girl choking in the park was the daughter of a billionaire CEO. One act of heroism, one ruthless rejection, one deleted email that could have changed everything. But fate has a way of finding the truth. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The morning sun broke over Bridgewater with the kind of golden light that promised new beginnings, but Daniel Mercer barely noticed. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his 15-year-old Honda Civic, the fabric worn thin from years of budget living and desperate hope. The tie had been his father's, one of the few things he'd kept after the funeral, and wearing it felt like carrying a piece of strength he didn't quite possess on his own. "You've got this, Dad." Clara's voice echoed in his memory from that morning, her small hand squeezing his before he left their cramped apartment. At 9 years old, his daughter had learned to be brave in ways no child should have to. The progressive muscular condition that weakened her legs had already stolen her ability to run, to dance, to simply be a carefree kid. But surgery could change that. Dr. Morrison had been clear about that. The procedure was experimental, expensive, and their only real shot at giving Clara back the childhood she deserved. And it all hinged on today. Daniel grabbed his worn leather portfolio from the passenger seat, the same one he'd carried through college, when life still felt full of promise. When his wife Sarah had been alive, and they'd planned futures that stretched bright and endless before them. The portfolio was scarred now, its corners frayed, much like Daniel himself after 3 years of single parenthood, 2 part-time jobs, and more rejection letters than he could count. But today was different. Today was Lexington Dynamics. The company's name alone carried weight in Bridgewater, hell, across the entire country. Evelyn Langford had built the tech giant from nothing, transforming a small software startup into a multinational powerhouse that rivaled Silicon Valley's finest. Getting an interview there, even for a mid-level project coordinator position, was like winning a lottery ticket. The salary would be triple what Daniel scraped together now. The health insurance would be comprehensive enough to cover Clara's surgery without drowning them in medical debt for the rest of their lives. Daniel stepped out of his car, straightening his jacket, the only suit he owned, pressed so many times the fabric had started to shine in places it shouldn't. The towering glass structure of Lexington Dynamics rose before him like a cathedral to modern success, all sleek lines and reflective surfaces that seemed to touch the clouds. He checked his watch, 8:47 a.m. His interview was at 9:00 with Victor Langston, VP of Operations. 13 minutes to get through security, find the right floor, and make the impression of a lifetime. He could do this. He had to do this. The portfolio felt heavier than usual as he started toward the building, each step a small prayer. Inside were copies of his resume, letters of recommendation from his previous employer before the company downsized, samples of project plans he'd worked on during his MBA, the degree he'd finished online while Clara slept, burning midnight oil in their kitchen because dreams didn't wait for convenient timing. Bridgewater Park lay between the parking lot and the Lexington building, a green oasis in the heart of the business district. On any other day, Daniel might have appreciated the carefully maintained flower beds, the families already gathering for Saturday morning playtime, the distant sound of children's laughter mixing with birdsong. But today, the park was just an obstacle between him and everything he'd been fighting for. He walked quickly, eyes fixed on the gleaming tower ahead. That's when he heard the scream. It wasn't the playful shriek of children at play. Daniel knew that sound well enough from the rare moments when Clara had energy to really laugh. This was pure terror, a woman's voice cracking with panic that turned every head in the park. "Someone help! Please, somebody!" Daniel's feet stopped moving before his brain fully processed the decision. His head turned toward the sound, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Near the playground, a little girl in a yellow dress was surrounded by a small crowd. But she wasn't playing. She was bent forward, hands clutching at her throat, her face transitioning from red to a terrifying shade of purple. A young woman in a nanny's uniform was holding her, shaking her, crying out in panicked foreign words that needed no translation. The universal language of terror was clear. This child was dying. Daniel's watch read 8:49. The Lexington building stood tall in his peripheral vision, its doors beckoning with the promise of everything he needed. 11 minutes. He could make it if he kept walking. This wasn't his responsibility. There were other people here. Surely someone else could. But his eyes met the little girl's for just a moment, and in that instant, he didn't see a stranger's child. He saw Clara. Clara, who'd choked on a piece of hot dog 2 years ago at a friend's birthday party, turning that same awful shade of blue while Daniel's heart had nearly exploded with fear. Clara, who depended on him for everything because there was no one else. Clara, whose surgery depended on him walking through those doors in 11 minutes and nailing an interview he'd been preparing for all week. The little girl's eyes were wide with primal fear, the kind of terror that transcends age and understanding, the knowledge that something is terribly, fatally wrong. Daniel's portfolio hit the ground. His legs were moving before the conscious decision fully formed, muscle memory and something deeper, something fundamental about who he was, overriding calculation and self-preservation. The distance to the playground couldn't have been more than 50 yards, but it felt like miles as Daniel pushed through the gathering crowd of concerned onlookers, all of them frozen in that terrible human paralysis that comes from not knowing what to do. "Sir, please, she can't breathe." The nanny was sobbing, the little girl limp in her arms. "I don't know what happened. She was eating an apple and then—" Daniel didn't need to hear more. He could see it in the child's glassy eyes, the way her lips had turned blue, the absence of coughing, complete airway obstruction. He'd taken a CPR and first aid course years ago when Clara was born, had renewed it religiously even when money was tight, because being a single parent meant being the only line of defense between his daughter and disaster. "Give her to me," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Right now." The nanny hesitated for only a heartbeat before passing the girl over. Up close, Daniel could see she was maybe 6 or 7, with dark curls and a face that even in crisis was beautiful, cherished, loved. Someone's whole world was dying in his arms. No time for doubt. Daniel positioned the girl in front of him, wrapping his arms around her small torso from behind. He found the spot just above her navel, made a fist with one hand and grasped it with the other. The Heimlich maneuver. He'd practiced it on a dummy in a community center classroom lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Had never imagined he'd actually need to, "Please work," he whispered, more prayer than statement. He thrust inward and upward, hard enough to expel air but careful not to break ribs. Nothing. The girl's body was going slack, her struggles weakening. Panic tried to claw its way into Daniel's mind, but he shoved it down. Again, harder this time. Still nothing. Oh God, someone call 911!" A woman in the crowd was saying, her phone already out. But Daniel knew with the certainty of a parent who'd lived his worst nightmare once before, that an ambulance wouldn't arrive in time. It was now or never. Third thrust. He put everything into it, every ounce of desperate strength, feeling something give beneath his fist. And then, movement, a piece of apple, chunk of red skin still attached, expelled from the girl's mouth and flew onto the grass. The girl's body convulsed, drawing in air with a gasping, rattling breath that was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. She was crying now, coughing, alive. "Sophie! Oh my God! Sophie!" The nanny was sobbing with relief, reaching for the child as Daniel carefully transferred her over. The little girl, Sophie, was breathing in great heaving gulps, tears streaming down her face, but breathing. Her color was returning, the terrible blue fading back to healthy pink. The crowd erupted in applause and relieved exclamations. Hands patted Daniel's shoulders, voices thanked him. Someone was asking if he was a doctor. Daniel barely heard any of it. His own hands were shaking now that the crisis had passed, adrenaline giving way to the crash that always followed. "Sir, you saved her life," the nanny was saying, her accent thick with emotion. Eastern European, Daniel thought distantly. "How can I thank you? Please, what is your name?" Daniel's eyes found his portfolio lying in the grass 20 yards away, paper spilling from its open mouth. He looked down at himself, grass stains on the knees of his only suit, dirt on his white shirt, tie askew. He looked like he'd been in a fight. His watch read 8:57. "I have to go," Daniel said, the words coming out strangled. 3 minutes. The Lexington building was at least a 5-minute sprint away. "I'm sorry, I have to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He was already running, scooping up his portfolio without stopping, papers trailing behind him like desperate wishes. He heard the nanny calling after him, heard Sophie's small voice asking about the nice man, but he couldn't stop. His legs pumped, his lungs burned, his dress shoes, meant for polished floors, not parkland sprints, threatened to slip with every step. The park exit seemed impossibly far. When he finally burst through onto the sidewalk, the Lexington building loomed before him, so close and yet impossibly distant. Daniel ran harder than he'd run since high school track, his portfolio clutched against his chest like a shield, or maybe a prayer. Through the glass doors, security desk. "Appointment Langston, 9th floor," Daniel gasped out, his chest heaving. The guard looked at him with the kind of suspicion reserved for disheveled men running into corporate headquarters. But something in Daniel's desperation must have registered because after checking his ID, the guard waved him through. The elevator ride felt eternal. Daniel tried to smooth his hair, straighten his tie, brush grass off his knees. It was hopeless. He looked like exactly what he was, someone who'd just performed emergency first aid in a public park. His watch mocked him, 9:03, 3 minutes late. The 9th floor opened to a reception area done in minimalist white and chrome, all clean lines and expensive art that probably cost more than Daniel's annual income. A receptionist with perfectly styled hair looked up from her desk, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw his disheveled state. "I'm here for," Daniel started, trying to catch his breath. "Victor Langston. 9 o'clock interview. Daniel Mercer. I know I'm late, I can explain. Mr. Mercer." The voice came from behind the receptionist, cold and clipped. A man emerged from a nearby office, tall and angular, in a suit that probably cost what Daniel paid in rent for 3 months. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression carved from granite. "You were scheduled for 9 o'clock. It is now." He made a show of checking his own watch, something expensive and Swiss-ish 9:04. "Sir, Mr. Langston, I apologize. There was an emergency in the park. An emergency." Victor Langston's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a predator showing teeth. "Mr. Mercer, do you know how many people would kill for the opportunity you just squandered? Do you know how many resumes crossed my desk for this position? I understand, but if you'll just let me explain, punctuality is respect, Mr. Mercer. It's the bare minimum of professional courtesy. You've demonstrated that you possess neither." Victor's eyes traveled down Daniel's stained suit, his grass-marked knees, and the disdain in his gaze was palpable. "You couldn't even be bothered to show up presentable." "A little girl was choking." Daniel's voice came out stronger than he felt, desperation giving way to a spark of anger. "She was dying. I stopped to save her life." For a moment, something flickered in Victor's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or calculation? But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold dismissal. "I'm sure that's a very compelling story, Mr. Mercer. I'm also sure you understand that I have no way of verifying it, and more importantly, I have 12 other qualified candidates who managed to arrive on time." Victor turned to the receptionist. "Please see Mr. Mercer out, and remove his information from our system. We won't be moving forward." "Wait!" Daniel took a step forward, hating the pleading note in his voice, but unable to stop it. "Please, my daughter, she needs surgery. This job, the insurance, it's her only chance. I'm not asking for special treatment, just 5 minutes to—" "We're done here." Victor's tone left no room for argument. He turned on his heel and walked back into his office, the door closing with a soft, final click that might as well have been a gunshot. Daniel stood frozen in the pristine reception area, his portfolio hanging limply at his side. The receptionist looked at him with something that might have been pity, which somehow made it worse. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Daniel nodded numbly. His legs felt like they were made of lead as he walked back to the elevator. The descent to the ground floor took 9 floors and felt like 9 years. When he emerged back into the morning sunlight, the world looked exactly the same as it had 30 minutes ago. Same park, same families, same golden light. But Daniel's universe had fundamentally shifted. He'd saved a life. He'd lost everything. The walk back to his car felt like a death march. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Clara, texting to ask how it went. She'd been so excited this morning, talking about how they could get a bigger apartment once Dad got his new job, maybe even get a dog. She'd always wanted a dog. He couldn't bear to look at the message. Not yet. When Daniel finally collapsed into the driver's seat of his Honda, he let his head fall forward against the steering wheel. His hands were still shaking, though whether from the adrenaline crash or the devastating loss or the sheer impossibility of his situation, he couldn't say. A little girl was alive because of him. Sophie, that's what the nanny had called her. Somewhere in this city, a family was intact, a child was breathing, parents would get to tuck their daughter into bed tonight. That had to matter. That had to be worth something. But Clara... Daniel's vision blurred. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, refusing to cry, even though every fiber of his being wanted to break down. Crying was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed to figure out his next move, needed to find another job, needed to... His phone buzzed again. This time, Daniel forced himself to look. Clara. Dad, how did it go? Did you wow them? 3 years ago, when Sarah's cancer had taken her with the kind of cruel speed that left no time for proper goodbyes, Daniel had made a promise at her graveside. He'd sworn that he would take care of their daughter, that Clara would never want for anything, that he would move heaven and earth to give her the life Sarah had wanted for her. He'd broken that promise today. Not by choice, not by negligence, but broken nonetheless. Daniel's fingers hovered over the phone keyboard. What could he possibly say? Sorry, sweetheart. I chose a stranger's kid over your future? It was true, and yet it was unbearable. Finally, he typed, Didn't get it, but I love you. See you soon. The response came almost immediately. It's okay, Dad. You're still my hero. If she only knew. If Clara knew that her hero had just traded away her one real shot at walking normally, all for a child whose name he barely knew, would she still think he was heroic? Or would she see him the way Victor Langston had, as someone who couldn't handle his priorities, who let emotion override reason? Daniel started the car, but he didn't pull out of the parking space. Couldn't. Not yet. He just sat there, engine idling, staring at the Lexington Dynamics building through his dirty windshield. Up there, in that chrome and glass tower, people were making million-dollar decisions, changing the world, living lives of purpose and meaning. Down here, he was just a single dad who'd done the right thing and lost everything. The morning sun continued to climb, indifferent to human drama. Families packed up their picnic blankets in Bridgewater Park. In the Lexington building, Victor Langston was probably already interviewing his next candidate, someone punctual and pristine who would never dream of stopping for emergencies. And somewhere in that building, though Daniel didn't know it yet, security footage was recording everything. The park, the choking, the desperate sprint, the dismissal. Evidence waiting to be discovered. But Daniel knew none of this. All he knew was the hollow ache in his chest and the impossible question that every parent eventually faces. When you can't save everyone, how do you choose? And having chosen, how do you live with what it cost? He pulled out of the parking lot slowly, heading back to the apartment where his daughter waited, where medical bills piled up on the kitchen counter, where hope had become something measured in millimeters of possibility rather than miles. Behind him, in Bridgewater Park, a little girl named Sophie was being loaded into a private car, her nanny clutching her close and murmuring prayers of gratitude. The grass stain on Sophie's yellow dress would come out in the wash. The apple that had nearly killed her lay forgotten beneath a park bench, and the man who'd saved her life drove away, not knowing that in saving one child, he'd set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone connected to the little girl in yellow. Fate, as it turned out, was just getting started. The afternoon light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Daniel's apartment, casting prison bar shadows across the worn carpet. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen without really seeing it, job search websites blurring together into a meaningless jumble of requirements he couldn't meet, and positions he was overqualified for but desperate enough to consider. Behind him, Clara was doing homework at the coffee table, her leg braces propped against the couch, a constant reminder of everything he'd failed to secure for her. Dad? Clara's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. You've been staring at that same page for like 20 minutes. Daniel blinked, forcing himself to focus. His daughter was watching him with those perceptive eyes that seemed far too wise for 9 years old, the eyes that had learned to read his moods and worries because there was no other adult to shield her from the reality of their situation. Just job hunting, sweetheart. Lots of options out there. The lie tasted bitter, but what was he supposed to say? Actually, I threw away our best chance this morning for a stranger, and now I'm trying to figure out how we're going to survive. It's okay if you're sad about the Lexington thing. Clara tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear, a gesture so like her mother that Daniel's chest ached. Mr. Peterson says sometimes the best things happen when we don't get what we think we want. Mr. Peterson was Clara's physical therapist, a kind man in his 60s who worked with her twice a week on the exercises that kept her mobile. He had a gift for turning hardship into wisdom, for making Clara feel strong instead of broken. Daniel wished he had that talent. Mr. Peterson is a smart guy, Daniel said, closing the laptop before Clara could see the rejection email he just received from another company, his third this week, not counting this morning's disaster. How's the homework coming? Done. It's Friday, remember? Mrs. Chen doesn't believe in weekend homework. Clara grinned, then her expression turned mischievous. Which means we could order pizza tonight. We haven't had Tony's in forever. Forever, in Clara's timeline, was about 6 weeks. The last time Daniel had felt flush enough to splurge on anything beyond rice, beans, and whatever vegetables were on sale. Tony's pizza was a luxury, $15 they didn't have, but looking at his daughter's hopeful face, Daniel felt something crack inside him. You know what? Pizza sounds perfect. Clara's squeal of delight almost made the financial irresponsibility worth it. Almost. But as Daniel called in the order and quoted his credit card number, he tried not to think about the bill that would come due, or the fact that every dollar spent on pizza was a dollar not going toward medical debt, rent, or the rapidly dwindling college fund he'd promised Sarah he'd maintain. While they waited for delivery, Clara convinced him to play cards, and for a brief window of time, Daniel let himself exist in this moment. His daughter's laughter, the comfortable, shabby familiarity of their small apartment, the simple joy of Go Fish. These were the moments Sarah used to call the real wealth, back when they'd been young and in love and thought poverty was romantic as long as they had each other. But Sarah wasn't here to see how unromantic it had become. She wasn't here to help carry the weight of impossible decisions and mounting bills. She wasn't here to tell Daniel whether he'd done the right thing that morning, whether saving a stranger's child while sacrificing their own daughter's future was heroism or selfishness masquerading as virtue. The pizza arrived, and they ate it on the couch watching Clara's favorite nature documentary, something about dolphins that she'd seen a dozen times but never tired of. Daniel barely tasted his slices. His mind kept circling back to that moment in the park, playing it over and over like a film reel he couldn't stop. What if he'd kept walking? What if he'd let someone else be the hero? Would it make him a monster to admit that part of him, a small, desperate part, wished he had? His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, his best friend since college and one of the few people who knew exactly how dire Daniel's situation had become. Marcus: heard about Lexington. I'm sorry, man. You okay? Daniel had texted him the basics earlier, needing to tell someone about the catastrophic morning. Marcus worked in HR for a mid-sized firm across town, nothing as prestigious as Lexington Dynamics, but stable, decent. He'd been the one to encourage Daniel to apply to Lexington in the first place, had helped him polish his resume and practice interview questions. Daniel: been better, been worse, still breathing. Marcus: that's the spirit. Listen, we have a junior analyst position opening up here next month. Pay's not as good as Lexington would have been, but it's something. I can get your resume to the top of the pile. Daniel read the message 3 times. A junior analyst position would mean a pay cut from what he'd been hoping for at Lexington. Would mean Clara's surgery would have to wait longer. Would mean more months of watching his daughter struggle with simple tasks that other kids took for granted. But it was something. In the wreckage of this morning, something felt like a lot. Daniel: I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Marcus: that's what friends are for. Hey, you did a good thing this morning, even if it didn't work out. That matters. Did it? Daniel wanted to believe that, needed to believe it, but sitting in his cramped apartment with his daughter who might never run normally because her father had chosen a stranger over her future, belief felt like a luxury he couldn't afford either. "Dad, you're doing the staring thing again." Clara had paused the documentary, her head tilted in concern. "What's wrong?" "Everything. Nothing." "How did you explain to a 9-year-old that the world wasn't fair, that doing the right thing sometimes meant losing everything, that her father was terrified he'd made a choice that would haunt them both forever?" "Just tired, kiddo. It's been a long day." Clara studied him for a moment with those two perceptive eyes, then scooted closer on the couch, leaning her head against his shoulder. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence, and Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It's okay, Dad," she said softly. "We're okay." But were they? As the documentary played on and the evening deepened into night, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something, teetering between disaster and salvation, and he had no idea which way they'd fall. Across the city, in a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of Lexington Dynamics headquarters, Evelyn Langford was experiencing her own crisis, though hers came wrapped in Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering sprawl of Bridgewater. "Ms. Langford, I really need you to look at these quarterly reports." Her assistant, James, hovered nearby with a tablet, his expression pained. James had worked for Evelyn for 8 years and had learned to read her moods, knew when to push and when to retreat. Right now, every instinct was probably screaming at him to retreat. "Not now." Evelyn's voice came out sharper than intended. She was standing at the window, phone pressed to her ear, listening to her head of security deliver yet another non-update. "We've canvassed the park, ma'am. Interviewed everyone we could find who witnessed the incident. The description is consistent. Mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a gray suit. But nobody got a name. He disappeared before the paramedics arrived." "He didn't disappear, Marcus. He ran. Find out why." Evelyn's reflection in the window glass looked like a stranger. Perfectly styled hair, designer suit, the kind of polished perfection that appeared on magazine covers and business profiles. But her eyes were wild with something that transcended her carefully maintained image. Fear. Pure maternal fear. "Yes, ma'am. We're checking security footage from surrounding buildings, running facial recognition against. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to knock on every door in this city. Find him." She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. It was picked up on the first ring. "Mrs. Langford?" The nanny's voice was still shaky, hours after the incident. "Sophie is sleeping. The doctor said she will be fine, no damage to her throat." "I don't want medical updates, Katya. I want details. Everything you remember about the man who saved her. Everything." "I told the security man already. Tell me again." So Katya did, and Evelyn listened to every word like it was scripture. The man's steady hands, his calm voice, despite visible panic. The way he dropped everything, literally dropped his leather portfolio, to run to Sophie's aid. The grass stains on his knees, the desperate apology before he'd sprinted away as if the very devil was chasing him. "He said he had to go," Katya recalled, "like he was late for something very important. His eyes, Mrs. Langford, they were so kind but so frightened? Not of helping Sophie, but of something else." After the call ended, Evelyn stood alone in her penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. The modern art on the walls, pieces worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The furniture, custom designed by some European architect whose name carried weight in circles Evelyn moved through. The awards and accolades displayed with calculated modesty on floating shelves. None of it mattered. Sophie mattered. Sophie, who'd nearly died on a sunny Saturday morning because Evelyn had been too busy working to take her to the park herself, had pawned her daughter off on the nanny for the 100th time this month. Sophie, who'd been saved by a stranger who'd vanished before Evelyn could even learn his name. The guilt was crushing, but underneath it, burning brighter, was a fierce determination that had built Lexington Dynamics from a garage startup into a Fortune 500 company. Evelyn Langford did not accept defeat. She did not accept mysteries. And she absolutely did not accept being unable to thank the man who'd saved her daughter's life. She would find him, whatever it took. The weekend dragged by with the particular torture of forced normalcy. Daniel took Clara to the library Saturday afternoon, let her check out a stack of books that would keep her occupied for the next week. They played board games, they watched movies, they existed in their small world and pretended everything was fine. Sunday morning, Daniel attended an online church service, something he'd started after Sarah died, more for the ritual and community than any strong religious conviction. But today, the pastor's message about faith and trusting in divine timing felt like salt in a wound. Divine timing? Where was divine timing when Clara needed surgery? Where was it when Daniel had been seconds away from an interview that could have changed everything? By Monday, the walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. Daniel needed to get out, needed to do something productive, so he left Clara with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who adored Clara and regularly offered to watch her for free, and headed to the temp agency where he'd picked up odd jobs before. The office was depressing in the way that places of desperation always are. Fluorescent lighting, worn chairs, a receptionist who'd clearly stopped caring about anything years ago. Daniel filled out forms, updated his information, and was told they'd call if anything came up. Translation: don't hold your breath. On his way back to his car, Daniel's phone rang with an unknown number. His heart jumped, irrationally, desperately hoping it might be Lexington calling to say there'd been a mistake, that Victor Langston had reconsidered, that, "Mr. Mercer, this is Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on everyday heroes, and we understand you saved a child's life in Bridgewater Park on Saturday. We'd love to interview you." Daniel's stomach dropped. "How did you get my name?" "The incident was captured on park security footage. We're always looking for inspiring human interest stories, and I'm not interested. Please don't call again." Daniel ended the call, his hands suddenly shaking. Security footage. Of course there would be security footage, which meant it was only a matter of time before what? Before Victor Langston saw it and realized Daniel had been telling the truth? Fat chance. Men like Langston didn't admit mistakes. Before Clara found out what he'd sacrificed? That was inevitable anyway. Before the child's parents found him and thanked him? That thought should have been comforting, but instead it filled Daniel with something uncomfortably close to resentment. He didn't want gratitude. He wanted his daughter to walk normally. He wanted to not lay awake at night calculating whether he could afford both electricity and internet this month. He wanted the luxury of heroism that didn't cost everything. The phone rang again, different number. Then again. Word was spreading somehow, the story taking on a life of its own in the 24-hour news cycle that fed on feel-good narratives to balance the constant stream of tragedy. Daniel turned his phone off entirely. Tuesday morning brought a surprise that Daniel wasn't sure how to interpret. A courier knocked on his door, an actual professional courier, the kind that delivered important documents for law firms and corporations, and handed him a thick envelope with the Lexington Dynamics logo embossed in silver. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a formal letter on expensive paper and a check that made his vision blur. The letter was corporate speak, all polite distance and legal precision, but the gist was clear. Lexington Dynamics had become aware that Daniel had assisted in a medical emergency prior to his scheduled appointment. And while the company regretted that he'd missed his interview, they appreciated his civic-mindedness.
Chase.
The enclosed check for $5,000 was offered with gratitude for his public service and was in no way an admission of liability or obligation. $5,000. It was more money than Daniel had seen at once since never, actually. Even in the good days before Sarah got sick, they'd lived paycheck to paycheck, young and optimistic and terrible with savings. $5,000 would cover 2 months of rent. It would buy Clara new braces that actually fit properly instead of the adjusted hand-me-downs she wore now. It would pay down their most pressing medical debts. It was also, unmistakably, hush money. Daniel read the letter 3 times, analyzing every word choice. There was no apology for Victor Langston's behavior, no acknowledgement that Daniel had been treated unfairly, just money, cold, corporate, make-this-go-away money. Part of him wanted to tear up the check, to call them back and tell them where they could shove their guilt payment. But rent was due in 2 weeks, and pride was another luxury he couldn't afford. He deposited the check that afternoon, hating himself a little more with each digit he entered into the ATM. The week crawled forward. Marcus came through with the junior analyst interview, which Daniel nailed despite his mounting cynicism about corporate culture. The job was his if he wanted it, pending background check and references, start date in 3 weeks. It was anticlimactic after the Lexington dream, but it was employment, and that was enough. Clara seemed more energetic that week, buoyed by Daniel's improved mood, or maybe just by the natural resilience of childhood. She talked about a field trip her class was planning, about the book she was reading, about nothing and everything with the kind of casual enthusiasm that reminded Daniel why he kept fighting. Friday evening, Daniel was making spaghetti, the one meal he could reliably cook without disaster, when his phone rang with yet another unknown number. He'd turned it back on days ago, had mostly stopped getting calls from media outlets, so he answered without thinking. "Is this Daniel Mercer?" The voice was female, professional, with an edge of steel underneath the courtesy. "Who's asking?" "My name is Evelyn Langford. I'm the CEO of Lexington Dynamics. I believe you saved my daughter's life last Saturday." The wooden spoon Daniel had been using fell from his hand, clattering against the stove. Behind him, Clara called out asking if everything was okay, but Daniel couldn't form words. His mind was racing, trying to understand. The little girl had been Evelyn Langford's daughter? The Evelyn Langford? "Mr. Mercer, are you there?" Yes, I'm here," Daniel forced his voice to work. "How did you find me?" "Security footage from the park, facial recognition, some very determined investigators." There was a pause. "And a deleted interview appointment in our system that matched the timestamp of when you ran from the park. An appointment that shouldn't have been deleted, but was. I'm still looking into that." The implications crashed over Daniel like a wave. Victor Langston had deleted his information? Why would... "Mr. Mercer, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning, if possible. I have some things I'd like to discuss, and I'd like to thank you properly, if you'll let me." "You already sent a check." The words came out harder than Daniel intended. "Very generous, very corporate. Am I supposed to sign an NDA next?" Evelyn Langford's laugh was unexpected, genuine, almost rueful. "You're angry. You have every right to be. That check was not my idea. When I found out what had happened, I wanted to reach out personally, but I was advised against it. Legal concerns, you understand." "I don't, actually." "No, I suppose you wouldn't, Mr. Mercer. I'm not calling as a CEO right now. I'm calling as a mother whose daughter is alive because of you. Please, give me 1 hour tomorrow. If after that you want nothing to do with me or my company, I'll respect that. But I need to look you in the eye and say thank you. And I think..." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. "I think there are things we should discuss. About that morning, about what it cost you." Daniel looked around his small kitchen, at Clara setting the table with mismatched plates, at the life they'd built from scraps and determination. What did he have to lose by meeting with Evelyn Langford? At worst, it would be an hour of his time. At best, he didn't dare imagine what "at best" might look like. "Where and when?" "My office, Lexington Dynamics. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Come to the top floor. My personal elevator is in the south lobby. Just give them your name." After he hung up, Daniel stood motionless for so long that the pasta water boiled over, hissing against the burner. Clara materialized at his elbow, concerned, and he snapped back to reality, turning down the heat and wiping up the mess. "Who was that?" Clara asked. "Someone from that company. The one from the interview that didn't happen." "Are they going to give you another chance?" Daniel looked at his daughter, at the hope shining in her eyes, and couldn't bring himself to speculate. He'd learned too much about hope lately, how heavy it could be, how much it hurt when it died. "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." That night, after Clara was asleep, Daniel stood at his bedroom window looking out over Bridgewater's modest skyline. Somewhere out there, in a tower that dwarfed everything around it, Evelyn Langford was probably still working. People didn't build empires by keeping regular hours. Somewhere in her penthouse or mansion or wherever, billionaires kept their children. Sophie was sleeping, breathing easily, alive. Daniel had saved her. That was real. That was undeniable. And now her mother wanted to meet him. He tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what made mornings like last Saturday possible. The belief that things could get better, that one opportunity could change everything, that the universe rewarded good people with good outcomes. But despite himself, despite everything, Daniel felt it anyway. That terrible, fragile thing with feathers, taking flight in his chest even as he tried to cage it. Tomorrow he would meet Evelyn Langford. Tomorrow he would find out what things to discuss meant. Tomorrow, something would happen, good or bad, disaster or deliverance. He couldn't guess. Tonight, he would sleep the fitful sleep of a man standing at a crossroads, unable to see what lay down either path. The alarm clock on his nightstand blinked 11:47 p.m., then 11:48, measuring out time in glowing red numbers that felt like a countdown to something Daniel couldn't name. He climbed into bed, pulled the worn covers up to his chin, and closed his eyes against a future that refused to come into focus. In the darkness, he thought about choices and consequences, about little girls in yellow dresses and leather portfolios dropped in grass, about the incalculable cost of doing the right thing and the impossible weight of wondering if you'd made the wrong choice anyway. And then, because even men carrying impossible burdens eventually succumb to exhaustion, Daniel Mercer slept. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough, the way momentous days always do. Daniel woke at 6, 2 hours before his alarm, his mind already racing through scenarios and possibilities he couldn't control. He lay in bed listening to the sounds of the apartment building coming to life around him. Mrs. Chen's television murmuring through the thin walls, someone's shower running in the unit above, the distant wail of a siren cutting through the early morning quiet of Bridgewater. By 7, he'd showered twice, trying to wash away the anxiety that clung to his skin like humidity. He stood in front of his closet staring at the same gray suit he'd worn last Saturday, now cleaned and pressed, the grass stains miraculously removed by the Korean dry cleaner 2 blocks over, who'd clucked her tongue sympathetically when he'd explained what happened. The suit looked presentable now, almost respectable, but Daniel couldn't shake the memory of Victor Langston's contemptuous gaze traveling over the disheveled fabric, the dismissal in his eyes. "You're wearing the interview suit again." Clara appeared in his doorway, already dressed for school in jeans and her favorite purple sweater, the one with the sparkly unicorn that Sarah had bought her the Christmas before she died. "That's a good sign, right?" Daniel turned from the closet, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. "It's the only suit I own, kiddo. Not much of a choice there." "But you're going back to that company, the one that said no before." Clara limped into the room, her morning stiffness always worse after a full night of immobility, and sat on the edge of his bed. "Maybe they changed their mind. Maybe they realized you're awesome." "I'm meeting with someone different this time. The CEO, actually." Daniel pulled on the suit jacket, adjusted the collar. "But I don't want you to get your hopes up, Clara. This isn't a job interview. It's just a conversation." "About what?" How did he explain this? That he was meeting with one of the most powerful women in America because he'd saved her daughter's life, and now she wanted to what? Thank him in person? Offer him more hush money? Actually give him the job he'd lost? The possibilities spiraled in his mind like leaves in a windstorm, never settling on anything concrete. "About that emergency in the park," Daniel said finally. "Turns out the little girl I helped was her daughter. She wants to say thank you properly." Clara's eyes went wide. "Whoa, that's like something from a movie. The universe is totally setting you up for something big, Dad. I can feel it." The universe has a funny way of working sometimes. Daniel checked his reflection one more time. Hair combed, tie straight, the worry lines around his eyes maybe a little deeper than they'd been a week ago, but otherwise presentable. "You're all set for Mrs. Chen?" "Dad, I'm 9, not 5. I know the drill." But Clara stood and wrapped her arms around his waist anyway, squeezing tight in the way she did when she sensed he needed it more than she did. "Go wow them. Again, for real this time." The drive to Lexington Dynamics felt different than it had last Saturday, though the route was identical. Maybe it was the lack of desperate hope, replaced now by a numb curiosity about what this meeting would bring. Maybe it was the way the building seemed less like a cathedral to success and more like just another structure of steel and glass, imposing but ultimately ordinary. Or maybe Daniel had simply used up his capacity for nervous optimism, leaving behind only a tired resignation to whatever came next. He parked in the visitor lot this time. No running through parks, no last-minute sprints. He had 20 minutes to spare, so he sat in his car and watched people file into the building, all of them moving with the kind of purposeful confidence that came from having a place to be, a role to fill, a paycheck that cleared without anxiety. Once upon a time, Daniel had moved through the world that way too. He wondered if he'd ever get that feeling back. At 9:45, he walked through the main entrance, but instead of heading to the security desk he'd rushed past last week, he turned toward the south lobby as Evelyn had instructed. The private elevator was impossible to miss, a separate alcove with marble floors and a single pair of brass doors that looked like they'd been imported from some European palace. A security guard sat at a small desk nearby, and he looked up as Daniel approached. "Daniel Mercer," Daniel said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I have a 10 o'clock with Ms. Langford." The guard checked his tablet, nodded, and gestured toward the elevator. "You're cleared. Top floor. Ms. Langford is expecting you." The elevator interior was all dark wood and soft lighting, playing classical music so quietly it was almost subliminal. As the doors closed and the car began its smooth ascent, Daniel caught his reflection in the polished brass panel. He looked tired, older than 34, like a man who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The elevator ride was over too quickly. The doors opened directly into a reception area that made the 9th floor's minimalist aesthetic look cheap by comparison. This was where real power lived, in the understated elegance of furniture that cost more than cars, in the original artwork that probably required its own insurance policy, in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of Bridgewater that made the city look almost beautiful. A young man in an impeccably tailored suit stood near a desk, and he smiled with professional warmth as Daniel stepped out. "Mr. Mercer, welcome. I'm James, Ms. Langford's assistant. She's finishing up a call, but she'll be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." James disappeared and returned moments later with a bottle of sparkling water in glass, not plastic, glass, and gestured toward a seating area with leather chairs that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. "Please, make yourself comfortable. It shouldn't be more than a few minutes." Daniel sat, feeling acutely out of place in this rarefied atmosphere. Through an open door to his right, he could see into what must be Evelyn's office. More windows, a desk that looked carved from a single piece of dark wood, bookshelves lined with what appeared to be actual books, rather than the decorative spines some executives favored. And standing at the window with her back to him, phone pressed to her ear, was Evelyn Langford herself. Even from this distance and angle, she commanded attention. Tall, maybe 5'9", wearing a navy suit that probably had a designer label Daniel wouldn't recognize. Her dark hair was pulled back in some kind of elegant twist, and her posture was ramrod straight, the bearing of someone who'd learned young that the world watched her every move and had decided to give them something worth watching. Daniel couldn't hear her words, but her tone carried through the open door, measured, authoritative, with an undercurrent of steel that suggested whoever was on the other end of that call had better deliver whatever she was asking for. This was a woman who built empires. This was a woman who probably had people fired before breakfast and acquisitions completed before lunch. This was a woman so far removed from Daniel's world that they might as well be different species. And yet, underneath all that power and polish, she was also just a mother whose daughter had nearly died. That was the thought Daniel held on to as his anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. Whatever else Evelyn Langford was, she was also just a parent who understood what it meant to be terrified for your child. That, at least, was something they had in common. The call ended. Evelyn turned from the window, her gaze immediately finding Daniel through the open door. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the space. Two strangers connected by a moment of crisis, both trying to figure out what came next. Then Evelyn smiled, and it transformed her face from intimidating to almost warm. She said something to James that Daniel couldn't hear, then walked toward him with her hand extended. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct. Up close, Daniel could see faint shadows under her eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could quite hide, and tiny lines around her mouth that spoke of stress carried with grace. She was probably his age, maybe a year or two older, but she wore the weight of her responsibilities like armor. Please come into my office. We have a lot to discuss. Daniel followed her into the expansive space, and James quietly closed the door behind them, leaving them alone. Evelyn gestured to a seating area near the windows, not the formal desk and chairs set up, but something more casual, two sofas facing each other with a low table between them. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Mercer, because I think we're both too old for games and you've already wasted enough of your time on my company. Evelyn sat, crossing her legs with the kind of elegant economy that suggested years of deportment training or maybe just natural grace. First and foremost, I need you to know that Sophie is fine, completely recovered, no lasting effects. The doctors were amazed at how quickly you acted, how correctly you performed the Heimlich. They said that most people freeze in those situations, or they do it wrong and cause more damage. You saved her life, and you did it perfectly. Daniel's throat tightened. I'm glad she's okay. I've been wondering. I'm sure you've been wondering about a lot of things. Evelyn's expression shifted, something harder entering her eyes. Like why you were treated so abominably by my VP of operations when you arrived late to an interview because you were saving a child's life. Like why your information was deleted from our system. Like why you received a check that felt more like a payoff than gratitude. The thought had crossed my mind, Daniel admitted. Victor Langston no longer works for this company. Evelyn's voice was ice. I terminated him Wednesday morning after I discovered what he'd done. Not just to you, but the pattern of behavior that incident revealed. Deleting your interview record was an attempt to cover his tracks, to prevent anyone from questioning why he'd rejected a candidate so harshly. It turns out he'd been doing similar things for months, dismissing qualified candidates for petty reasons, abusing his authority, creating a toxic environment in his department. Your case was simply the one that brought it all to light. Daniel sat back, processing this information. Victor Langston fired. The man who'd dismissed him with such contempt, who'd cost him everything with his rigid adherence to punctuality over compassion, was gone. Daniel should have felt vindicated. Instead, he just felt tired. I'm not telling you this to make you feel better, though I hope it does somewhat. Evelyn leaned forward, her intensity palpable. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that what happened to you was wrong. Categorically, unequivocally wrong. You did an extraordinary thing that morning, and you were punished for it by someone who represented my company. That reflects on me, on my leadership, and I take that responsibility seriously. With all due respect, Ms. Langford, you didn't know. I should have known. The words came out sharp. That's what leadership means. I've been so focused on quarterly reports and expansion strategies and board meetings that I lost sight of what was happening on my own operations floor. Victor's behavior, his treatment of employees and candidates. It was all there in the turnover rates and exit interviews if I'd been paying attention. I wasn't, and you paid the price for that, along with who knows how many others. There was genuine remorse in her voice. And something else. A vulnerability that Daniel suspected Evelyn Langford didn't show very often. This wasn't the billionaire CEO speaking. This was a person who'd made mistakes and was trying to figure out how to make them right. So what now? Daniel asked. Is that why you wanted to meet? To apologize? Partly. Evelyn stood and walked to her desk, returning with a folder. But mainly because I wanted to offer you something. The position you interviewed for, project coordinator in operations, it's yours if you want it. Same salary we'd advertised, same benefits package, starting as soon as you're available. Daniel's heart hammered. The job. She was offering him the job. Everything he'd lost last Saturday, handed back to him like a gift from the universe Clara had been so sure was orchestrating something. But even as relief flooded through him, something made him hesitate. That's incredibly generous, he said carefully. But I have to ask, is this charity? Are you offering me this job because I saved Sophie, or because you think I'm actually qualified? Evelyn's smile was approving, like he'd passed some kind of test. I wouldn't insult either of us by offering you a position out of misplaced gratitude. I had my HR director pull your application, your resume, your references. You're overqualified for the coordinator position, frankly. You have an MBA from a respected program, 5 years of project management experience before your previous company downsized, and every reference praised your work ethic and leadership skills. The only reason you weren't fast-tracked for something higher was that Victor never actually looked at your application properly. He scheduled you for an interview based on a keyword scan, then dismissed you for being late without ever considering what you could bring to the company. She opened the folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a formal offer letter, and the numbers made Daniel's breath catch. Not just the coordinator salary, this was for a senior project manager position, a full 2 levels higher than what he'd applied for, with a compensation package that was nearly double what he'd been hoping for. "This is what I'm actually offering you," Evelyn said. "A position that matches your qualifications and experience. The coordinator job is still available if you prefer something less demanding, but I don't think that's what you want. I think you want an opportunity to prove what you're capable of, not a consolation prize." Daniel stared at the offer letter, his mind racing. This was more than he dreamed of. This was life-changing. This was Clara's surgery without debt. This was moving to a better apartment. This was stability and security and the ability to breathe without constantly calculating whether they could survive another emergency. This was everything. "I can see you're skeptical," Evelyn said, her tone gentling. "You're wondering if this is still somehow about Sophie, if I'm letting gratitude cloud my judgment. So let me tell you what I see when I look at your file, Mr. Mercer. I see a man who completed his MBA while working full-time and raising a daughter alone. I see someone who maintained a 3.8 GPA while dealing with medical bills and grief, and probably more stress than most people experience in a lifetime. I see someone who's been working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet, but still finds time to keep up with industry trends and maintain his professional certifications. That's not someone who needs charity. That's someone any company would be lucky to have." Her words hit harder than they should have, and Daniel felt his eyes burning. When was the last time someone had seen him, really seen him, not just as a struggling single dad or a charity case or someone to be pitied, but as a professional with value and skills and something to contribute? "And yes," Evelyn continued, "what you did in the park matters to me. Not because it makes you special, though it does, but because it reveals character. You had everything to lose and you still stopped to help a stranger. That's the kind of person I want in my organization. That's the kind of integrity I want representing Lexington Dynamics." Daniel picked up the offer letter, reading through the details with shaking hands. Start date negotiable. Full health insurance with minimal copays that would cover Clara's surgery and ongoing treatment. Signing bonus to help with relocation or immediate expenses. 4 weeks paid vacation. It was almost obscene in its generosity compared to what he'd been surviving on. "There's no catch?" he heard himself ask. "No catch, just expectations. This is a demanding role, Mr. Mercer. You'd be overseeing major projects, leading teams, reporting directly to the new VP of Operations once we hire one. I expect excellence from everyone in this company, and I'd expect the same from you. What I did for Victor Langston, I'd do for anyone who abused their position or failed to meet our standards. This isn't a free ride. It's an opportunity, but one you'll have to earn every day." That actually made Daniel feel better. Charity would have been hard to accept, but earning his place, proving his worth through hard work, that he knew how to do, that he'd been doing his entire life. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel set the letter down. "Why go to all this effort? You could have just sent another check, maybe doubled it. Why track me down, fire your VP, offer me a job that's probably going to make other people in your company wonder about favoritism? Why risk all that?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the windows and the city beyond. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than before, stripped of its corporate polish. "I lost my husband 3 years ago. Sudden heart attack. He was only 37. One day we were planning Sophie's 4th birthday party. The next day I was planning his funeral." She looked back at Daniel, and he could see the grief still living in her eyes, old but never quite gone. "After he died, I threw myself into work, built the company bigger, faster, more successful. Told myself it was for Sophie's future, that I was securing her legacy. But the truth is, I was running from my own pain. I worked 60, 70 hours a week. I missed bedtimes and school events. I let nannies raise my daughter because I couldn't face being home in the house we'd shared, couldn't face being a single parent alone." Daniel understood that impulse more than she probably realized. The temptation to lose yourself in work, in busyness, in anything that let you avoid the gaping hole where your partner used to be. Last Saturday, I was in a board meeting that absolutely could have waited until Monday, Evelyn continued. Sophie asked me to take her to the park, and I said no. I sent her with Katya instead because I had important work to do, and then I almost lost her because I wasn't there, because I prioritized a spreadsheet over my daughter's actual presence in my life. Her voice cracked, just slightly, before she steadied it, in my life. Her voice cracked, just slightly, before she steadied it. You gave up a job interview, gave up your family's financial security, to save a child you'd never met. You made the choice I should have made when Sophie asked me to go to the park with her. You chose a person over professional advancement. And when I found out who you were, when I saw that you had a daughter of your own who needed you, who depended on you, and you still stopped to help Sophie, she trailed off, shaking her head. I can't give you back the week of stress and uncertainty you've lived through, but I can give you this opportunity, not as payment, not as charity, but as recognition of who you are and what you're worth, both as a professional and as a person. The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief and understanding. Two single parents who'd lost their partners too young, who carried the weight of responsibility alone, who understood what it meant to make impossible choices every single day. In this moment, the trappings of Evelyn's wealth and success seemed irrelevant. They were just two people trying to survive and do right by their kids in a world that didn't make it easy. I need to think about it, Daniel said finally, and Evelyn's expression flickered with what might have been disappointment before she nodded. Of course. This is a major decision. Take whatever time you need. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting, and Daniel rose with her. The offer stands for 2 weeks. After that, I'll need an answer so we can move forward one way or another. Can I ask one more thing? Daniel paused at the door. Could I meet her, Sophie? I've been wondering if she's okay, and I don't know, it might give me closure or something, if that's not weird. Evelyn's face softened into something approaching maternal warmth. She's been asking about you. The nice man, she calls you. She wanted to draw you a thank you picture, but we didn't know where to send it. She checked her watch. I'm supposed to pick her up from her ballet class in an hour. Actually take her myself for a change. If you'd like to join us, she'd be thrilled. And it would give you a chance to see what your choice in the park actually meant. 20 minutes later, Daniel found himself in the passenger seat of Evelyn's car. Not a chauffeur-driven town car, but a surprisingly normal SUV, albeit one that probably cost more than most houses. She drove herself, navigating Bridgewater's streets with the casual confidence of someone who'd grown up here, which Daniel learned she had. People always assume I'm from money, Evelyn said as they waited at a red light, that I had some trust fund or family connections that launched Lexington Dynamics. Truth is, my dad was a mechanic and my mom cleaned houses. I put myself through state college on scholarships and student loans, worked 3 jobs, slept maybe 4 hours a night, built the company from literally nothing, me and 2 friends in a garage living on ramen and delusion. How'd you go from ramen and garages to this? Daniel gestured vaguely at the world around them, the empire she'd built. Stubbornness mostly, and one good idea at the right time, a software solution for supply chain management that happened to hit just as e-commerce was exploding. We got lucky with timing, smart with scaling, and I worked harder than I've ever worked at anything. She glanced at him. But the work never stops, you know? There's always another competitor, another challenge, another fire to put out. I used to think that was exciting. Now I wonder if I've been using it as an excuse to avoid the harder work of actually living a life. They pulled up to a small studio in a nice part of town, and through the large windows, Daniel could see a handful of little girls in pink leotards following an instructor's movements. Evelyn parked but didn't get out immediately. She used to dance with a friend from her school, Evelyn said quietly, watching the class through the window. But I kept having to cancel, kept sending the nanny instead, and eventually the friend's mother stopped including Sophie in playdates. I told myself it was because the other parents were intimidated by my success, that it wasn't my fault. But it was. It is. Sophie's isolated because her mother is never around. Before Daniel could respond, the studio door opened and children began streaming out, chattering and laughing as they found their waiting parents. And then Daniel saw her, the little girl from the park, dark curls now pulled into a ballet bun, her face bright with exertion and joy. She spotted Evelyn's car, and her face lit up even more. And she started running toward them before stopping suddenly, her eyes going wide. Sophie had recognized Daniel through the windshield. Evelyn got out first, and Sophie crashed into her with the force of 7-year-old enthusiasm, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. But her eyes stayed fixed on Daniel as he climbed out of the passenger side, uncertain and suddenly awkward under the weight of her stare. "Mama," Sophie whispered, loud enough for Daniel to hear. "Is that the nice man? The one who helped me?" "Yes, baby. This is Mr. Mercer. He came to visit with us, if that's okay with you." Sophie released her mother and walked toward Daniel with the kind of fearless curiosity that only children possessed. She stopped directly in front of him, tilting her head back to look up at his face, studying him with serious eyes. "Thank you for saving me," she said with the formal politeness of a child who'd been coached on what to say. But then her formality cracked, and she was just a little girl again, words tumbling out. "I was really scared, and I couldn't breathe, and everything was getting dark, but then you were there, and you helped me, and then you were gone. And I wanted to say thank you, but you ran away, and Mama said we'd find you, and we did." She paused for breath. "Why did you run away?" Daniel knelt down to her level, his throat tight. "I had somewhere I needed to be. Something really important. But you know what? Helping you was more important than anything else that day. Mama says you have a little girl too. Is she my age?" "She's 9. Her name is Clara." "Does she like dancing?" "I love dancing and drawing and horses, but I've only seen them at the farm, not up close, and—" Sophie paused, something thoughtful crossing her young face. "Mama says I have to be more careful when I eat, that I have to take smaller bites. I told her it wasn't my fault I choked, that it was an accident, but she said from now on we have to be more careful. Both of us." The way she said "both of us" made Daniel look up at Evelyn, who was watching her daughter with an expression of such fierce love and regret that it was almost painful to witness. "Your mama's right," Daniel said gently. "Accidents happen, but we can be careful. And I'm very, very glad you're okay." Sophie smiled, and then without warning, she threw her arms around Daniel's neck, hugging him with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. Over her shoulder, Daniel saw Evelyn press a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining. When Sophie released him and skipped back to her mother, chattering about what they should have for lunch, Daniel stood slowly, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. This was what he'd saved. Not an abstract concept or a news story or a line item on some cosmic ledger of good deeds. This actual child, with her enthusiasm and innocence and whole life ahead of her. This little girl who looked at her mother with such uncomplicated love, who talked about horses and drawing and taking smaller bites of apples. This was what his choice had meant. They went to lunch at Sophie's favorite restaurant, a family-friendly place with crayons at every table and a menu featuring dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. It was so jarring to see Evelyn Langford, billionaire CEO, sitting in a vinyl booth discussing the merits of various dipping sauces with her daughter that Daniel almost laughed. But there was something beautiful about it too, something real in the way Evelyn listened to Sophie's rambling stories about ballet class and her best friend Emma and the book they were reading at school. This was the person underneath the corporate armor, just a mom trying to connect with her kid, trying to be present, trying to make up for lost time. Over chocolate milkshakes, Sophie's request, which Evelyn indulged without hesitation, Daniel found himself telling them about Clara. About her condition, about her strength and humor, and the way she never complained even when he knew she was hurting. Sophie listened with the rapt attention of a child hearing about another child, asking questions that were sometimes profound and sometimes wonderfully silly. "Will the surgery make her all better?" Sophie asked, stealing one of her mother's French fries. "It should help a lot. She'll be able to walk better, maybe even run. It won't fix everything, but it'll make things easier for her." "When I was scared in the park, when I couldn't breathe, I wished really hard for someone to help me," Sophie said, her voice dropping to the serious tone children used when sharing important truths. "And then you came. Maybe Clara wished for something too, and maybe that's why you met my mama. Maybe wishes work like that sometimes." From the mouths of babes, as the saying went. Daniel caught Evelyn's eye across the table, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. or just the shared recognition that children saw the world with a clarity that adults had learned to complicate. After lunch, after Sophie had drawn a picture for Clara featuring two stick-figure girls holding hands under a rainbow, after Evelyn had driven Daniel back to his car with Sophie singing pop songs off-key in the back seat, Daniel sat in his Honda and stared at the offer letter he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket all morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Clara. "How'd it go? Are you rich yet?" Daniel smiled despite himself and typed back, "Not rich, but maybe okay. Tell you when I get home." He looked up at the Lexington building one more time, at the tower where dreams were made and fortunes were won, and people like Victor Langston got to decide who was worthy of opportunity and who wasn't. Except Victor was gone now, and in his place was an offer that could change everything. Daniel thought about his daughter at home, waiting to hear if the universe had finally decided to throw them a break. He thought about Sophie, alive and happy, and talking about wishes that came true. He thought about Evelyn's words about character and integrity and choosing people over profit. He thought about the choice he'd made in the park, the impossible calculation between his daughter's future and a stranger's child, and how it had somehow impossibly led him here. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe the universe was orchestrating something, or maybe it was just luck, timing, the random chaos of life occasionally arranging itself into patterns that looked like purpose. Either way, Daniel knew what his answer would be. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on Evelyn's business card. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Mercer?" "I'll take the job," Daniel said. "The senior project manager position, if the offer's still open." "It's open." He could hear the smile in her voice. "When can you start?" "I need to give notice at my current job now since I just got hired somewhere else this week." 2 weeks? 2 weeks works perfectly. James will send over the paperwork tonight. Welcome to Lexington Dynamics, Daniel. Officially, this time. After the call ended, Daniel sat in his car for a long time, letting the reality of what had just happened wash over him. He had a job. A real job with benefits and security and a salary that would let him sleep at night without calculating whether they could afford both electricity and food. Clara could get her surgery. They could move to a better apartment, maybe even a small house with a yard. He could breathe without the constant weight of financial terror pressing on his chest. All because he'd stopped to help a choking child. All because he'd made an impossible choice, and somehow, miraculously, it had led him here. Daniel started his car and pointed it toward home, toward Clara, toward a future that suddenly felt possible instead of like something he had to fight for every single day. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds as he drove, painting Bridgewater in golden light that made even the worn parts of town look almost hopeful. And for the first time in 3 years since Sarah's death had shattered their world and left him scrambling to pick up the pieces alone, Daniel Mercer let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Clara was sitting on the front steps of their apartment building when Daniel pulled into the parking lot, her leg braces glinting in the afternoon sun. Her phone clutched in both hands like she'd been refreshing the same screen for hours. The moment she spotted his car, she was up, moving as fast as her condition allowed, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety that broke Daniel's heart even as it filled it. "Well?" she called out before he'd even closed the car door. "Dad, come on, you're killing me here." Daniel walked toward her slowly, letting the suspense build just a moment longer, unable to suppress the smile that had been threatening to break free since he'd left Lexington Dynamics. When he reached the steps, he scooped Clara up into his arms, despite her protests that she was too old for this, spinning her once before setting her back down. "I got the job, Clara Bear. A better job than the one I interviewed for. We're going to be okay." The sound that came out of his daughter was somewhere between a squeal and a sob, and then she was hugging him so hard he could barely breathe, her thin arms wrapped around his waist with surprising strength. "I knew it! I told you the universe was setting something up. Dad, this is amazing. Does this mean—" She pulled back, her eyes wide and hopeful in a way that made Daniel's throat tight. "Does this mean I can get the surgery?" "It means you can get the surgery. Dr. Morrison, the whole thing. The job comes with health insurance that'll cover almost everything." Clara burst into tears, the happy kind, the relief kind. the kind that came from a 9-year-old who'd been carrying the weight of her own medical bills like stones in her pockets for longer than any child should have to. Daniel held her while she cried, right there on the steps of their run-down apartment building, not caring who saw them or what they thought. This moment was theirs, earned through years of struggle and one impossible choice that had somehow, miraculously, led them here. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, her weathered face creasing into a smile when she saw them. "Good news, I take it." "The best news," Daniel confirmed, and Mrs. Chen clasped her hands together in that way she did when she was pleased, muttering something in Mandarin that he didn't understand but that sounded like a blessing. That evening felt like a celebration even though they couldn't afford to do anything fancy. Daniel ordered Chinese takeout, the good place, not the cheap one, and they ate it straight from the containers while Clara talked a mile a minute about everything this job would mean. A bigger apartment with her own room. New clothes that actually fit instead of hand-me-downs from the church donation box. Maybe even that art class she'd been wanting to take at the community center, but that cost $40 a month they'd never been able to spare. "And you'll be happy again," Clara said suddenly, her chopsticks pausing halfway to her mouth. "You haven't been happy in a really long time, Dad. Not since Mom." The observation was so acute, so painfully accurate, that Daniel had to look away for a moment. Kids saw everything he'd learned. You could hide your tears and force your smiles and pretend everything was fine, but they knew. They always knew. "I'm going to try to be," he said honestly. "This job, it's a chance to stop just surviving and start actually living again. For both of us." That night, after Clara had finally gone to bed still buzzing with excitement, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the employment contract James had emailed over, reading through every clause and provision with the kind of careful attention he'd learned to apply to anything that seemed too good to be true. But there were no hidden catches, no fine print that would snatch this opportunity away. It was real. The salary, the benefits, the start date 2 weeks away. All of it was real. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard you're not taking our junior analyst position. Can't say I'm surprised. Bigger fish to fry?" Daniel smiled and typed back. "Something like that. Thanks for believing in me when nobody else did." "That's what friends do. Drink soon to celebrate?" "Definitely. I'm buying." The response came quickly. "Damn right you are, Mr. Senior Project Manager." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of logistics and preparation. Daniel gave notice at his warehouse job, where his supervisor seemed genuinely happy for him, even as he complained about losing a reliable worker. He bought 2 new suits, not expensive ones, but decent ones that fit properly, and didn't carry memories of grass stains and rejection. He got a haircut at a real barber shop instead of the discount chain he usually frequented. He started reading up on Lexington Dynamics' current projects, studying their portfolio and client list, preparing himself to walk into that building not as a desperate job seeker, but as a professional who belonged there. Clara's energy seemed boundless during those weeks, fueled by hope and the tangible promise of change. They spent an afternoon touring apartments in better neighborhoods, places with working appliances and windows that actually sealed properly, and playgrounds where kids played without the constant background tension of poverty. They didn't sign a lease yet. Daniel wanted his first paycheck to clear before committing to anything, but just looking felt like permission to dream. On the Saturday before his start date, Daniel took Clara to meet Dr. Morrison to schedule her surgery. The specialist had been following Clara's case for 2 years, waiting for the day when insurance and finances would align to make the procedure possible. When Daniel handed over his new insurance card, Dr. Morrison's face broke into a genuine smile. "This is excellent coverage," she said, reviewing the benefits on her computer. "We can schedule Clara for late next month. Give her time to do some preparatory physical therapy. The recovery will be challenging, but if all goes well, she should see significant improvement in her mobility within 6 months. Clara gripped Daniel's hand so hard his fingers went numb, but her smile was incandescent. "I'll be able to run?" "You'll be able to run," Dr. Morrison confirmed, and Clara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, pressing her face against Daniel's arm. In the parking lot afterward, Clara was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window at the city passing by. Daniel was about to ask if she was okay when she spoke, her voice small and thoughtful. Dad? That little girl you saved in the park. Her mom is really the one who gave you the job, right? It's not just because you're good at your job stuff, it's because you saved her daughter. Daniel had been wondering when this conversation would come. Clara was too smart not to have connected the dots, too perceptive not to understand the unlikely chain of events that had led them here. Both things are true, he said carefully, navigating through traffic while trying to figure out how to explain complex adult realities to a 9-year-old. Ms. Langford gave me the job partly because I saved Sophie, that's her daughter's name, but she also gave it to me because she looked at my qualifications and decided I was good enough to deserve it. The first part got me in the door, the second part is why I get to stay. So it's like, you did something good, and the universe paid you back for it. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that sometimes, when we do the right thing, it leads us to places we wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. I don't know if it's the universe, or just luck, or just life being weird and complicated. Clara was quiet for another moment. I'm glad you stopped to help her, even though it was scary for us for a while. I'm glad you're the kind of person who would stop. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Monday morning arrived with the particular anxiety that comes with first days, the fear of not measuring up, of being exposed as an imposter, of discovering that the opportunity you've been given was a mistake. Daniel dressed carefully in one of his new suits, checked his appearance 3 times, and still felt like he was playing dress-up as a successful professional rather than actually being one. You look really fancy, Clara said over breakfast, eyeing him critically. Like a person from a movie about business people. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. You look like you belong there, Dad, like you're supposed to be doing important things. Daniel hoped she was right. He kissed Clara goodbye. Mrs. Chen would watch her until he got home, and drove to Lexington Dynamics with his stomach doing complicated gymnastics. The building looked less intimidating than it had that first Saturday, but only marginally. He was early, arriving 45 minutes before he was expected, unable to bear the thought of being late even though there was no longer a Victor Langston to judge him for it. The security guard from his previous visit recognized him and smiled. Welcome back, Mr. Mercer. HR is expecting you on the 15th floor. The morning was consumed by the administrative tedium of starting any new job. Paperwork and orientations, computer passwords and building access, the careful dance of meeting new colleagues and trying to remember names and titles. His direct supervisor was a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to his neighbor, who ran the project management division with efficient warmth. She was maybe 50, with short gray hair and the kind of competent air that made you trust her immediately. I'll be honest with you, Patricia said when they finally sat down in her office after the morning's bureaucracy. There's been some talk about how you got this position. People know you saved Ms. Langford's daughter. Some of them think you're here because of that connection rather than your qualifications. Daniel had been expecting this, but hearing it stated so bluntly still stung. I understand. What can I do to prove otherwise? Patricia's smile was approving. That's exactly the right response. You do your job, you do it well, and you let your work speak for itself. I've reviewed your file, Daniel. May I call you Daniel? And I think you're going to be an asset to this team, but I can't make anyone else believe that. You have to show them. I will. Good. Because I'm going to throw you in the deep end. She pulled up something on her computer, then turned the screen toward him. This is the Meridian Project, a complete supply chain overhaul for one of our major clients. The previous manager left rather suddenly. He worked under Victor Langston and decided to follow him out the door, and the project is currently floundering. Timeline's aggressive, budget's tight, clients getting nervous. It's a mess. Daniel studied the project overview, his mind already cataloging the problems he could see even in the brief summary. This was exactly the kind of challenge he'd thrived on in his previous job, the kind of complex puzzle that required technical skill and people management in equal measure. When do I start? Team meeting in an hour. Your team is 4 people, all of them good at what they do, but currently lacking direction. Client call is scheduled for Wednesday. You have 2 days to get up to speed and convince them we haven't completely dropped the ball. Patricia's expression was challenging, but not unkind. Think you can handle that? Yes. Daniel said it with more confidence than he felt, but that was half of management anyway, projecting certainty even when you were figuring things out as you went. The hour before the team meeting was a crash course in organized chaos. Daniel downloaded files, read status reports, studied the client's requirements and the current project plan. The previous manager had left things in disarray, with conflicting information and missed milestones and team members who clearly hadn't been communicating effectively. It was a disaster, but it was a fixable disaster. Probably. He hoped. The team meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room with views of the city that Daniel tried not to find distracting. His 4 team members filed in, all of them eyeing him with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. There was Jason, a young hotshot programmer who looked barely old enough to drink. Michelle, a logistics specialist in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. Robert, an older project coordinator who'd been with the company for a decade. And Priya, a data analyst who radiated quiet competence. "I'm Daniel Mercer," he started, standing at the head of the table because sitting felt too casual for this moment. "I know I'm coming into this project late, and I know some of you probably have questions about who I am and why I'm here. So let me be direct. Yes, I have a personal connection to Ms. Langford. I helped her daughter during a medical emergency. No, that's not why I was hired for this position. I was hired because Patricia Chen and her team reviewed my qualifications and decided I could do this job. But I understand that I need to prove that to you, and I intend to." The team exchanged glances, and Daniel could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. At least he'd acknowledged the elephant in the room, rather than pretending it didn't exist. "The Meridian project is struggling," Daniel continued, pulling up the project timeline on the screen. "We've missed 2 major milestones. We're trending 15% over budget, and our client is unhappy. That's not a judgment on any of you. From what I can see, you haven't had consistent leadership in weeks. But we need to fix it, and we need to fix it fast." "The previous manager left us with incomplete specifications," Michelle said, her tone defensive but factual. "We've been waiting for clarification from the client for 3 weeks." "Then we stop waiting. I'll reach out to them today. Set up a call for tomorrow instead of waiting until Wednesday. Jason, I need you to document every technical question we have. Michelle, compile your logistics concerns. Robert, Priya, same thing for your areas. By end of business today, I want a comprehensive list of everything we need from the client to move forward." "That's a pretty aggressive timeline, Chumped," Robert said, and there was skepticism in his voice that suggested he didn't think the new guy, the one who got his job because he was a hero, could actually pull this off. "It is," Daniel agreed, "but we don't have the luxury of gentle timelines. We have a client who's considering pulling their contract, and we have a reputation to maintain. So we're going to work fast, we're going to work smart, and we're going to show them why they hired Lexington Dynamics in the first place." The meeting went longer than scheduled as Daniel dug into the details, asking questions and taking notes, and beginning to form a picture of what needed to happen. His team was cautious at first, but he could see them warming up slightly as he demonstrated actual knowledge of project management, rather than just empty leadership platitudes. By the time they dispersed back to their desks, Daniel thought he'd at least established that he wasn't completely incompetent, even if they weren't ready to trust him yet. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Daniel reached out to the Meridian client and somehow convinced them to move their Wednesday call to Tuesday morning. He reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation, making notes and highlighting problems. He sent out a revised project plan with new timelines that were ambitious but achievable. He stayed 2 hours past when he should have left, only heading home when Patricia stuck her head in his office and told him that burning out on day 1 wasn't going to help anyone. Clara was already asleep when he got home, Mrs. Chen dozing on the couch with the TV on low volume. She waved off his apologies for being late and shuffled back to her own apartment, reminding him that she was retired and had nothing but time. Daniel checked on Clara, pulling her blanket up over her shoulders and brushing hair back from her forehead, then collapsed at the kitchen table with leftover Chinese food he was too tired to heat up. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Patricia tells me you made quite an impression today. Threw yourself into the Meridian disaster without hesitation." Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion and typed back, "Is that what we're calling it? The Meridian disaster? That's what it was before you got here. Let's see if you can turn it into the Meridian success story." "No pressure then." "Daniel, you stopped to save a stranger's child when you had everything to lose. Managing a difficult project should be a walk in the park compared to that. I have complete faith in you." He stared at the message for a long moment, something warm expanding in his chest. When was the last time someone had expressed complete faith in him? Sarah used to say things like that, back when they were young and still believed they could conquer the world together. But after she died, after he became a single parent struggling to keep his head above water, people had been sympathetic but not confident in him. They'd offered pity, not faith. Evelyn's words felt different. They felt like a challenge and a vote of confidence all at once. "Thank you," he typed back. "That means more than you know." The response came quickly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be demanding." She was right about that. The Tuesday morning client call was every bit as challenging as Daniel had anticipated. The Meridian Corporation's project lead was a man named Harrison Wheeler, and he was not pleased with how things had been going. For the first 10 minutes of the call, he detailed every missed deadline, every miscommunication, every reason why his company was considering terminating their contract with Lexington Dynamics. Daniel let him finish, taking notes and not interrupting, not making excuses. When Harrison finally paused for breath, Daniel spoke with calm authority. "Mr. Wheeler, everything you've said is accurate. We dropped the ball. But I'm not going to waste your time or mine explaining why that happened. What I'm going to do is tell you how we're going to fix it." Daniel shared his screen, pulling up the revised project plan he'd worked on until midnight. "Here's our new timeline. It's aggressive, but it's achievable. Here's how we're addressing each of the technical issues you've raised. And here's my personal commitment to you. I will send you a detailed status report every Friday afternoon. Any problems, you'll hear about them from me before they become crises. Any questions, I'll have answers within 24 hours. We're going to make this right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Harrison Wheeler spoke, and his tone was marginally less hostile. "That's quite a promise, Mr. Mercer. It's not a promise I'm making lightly, but it's one I intend to keep." The call ended without a definitive answer about whether Meridian would stick with the project, but it hadn't been a cancellation either. Daniel took that as a win. His team, who'd been sitting around the conference table in nervous silence during the call, looked at him with something approaching respect. "That was ballsy," Jason said once the line was disconnected. "You basically just put your reputation on the line for a project you've known about for like 30 hours. "We all put our reputations on the line every day," Daniel replied, already making notes about what needed to happen next. "Might as well be honest about it. Michelle, can you reach out to the shipping vendors this afternoon? Robert, I need those specification clarifications by end of day. Let's show Mr. Wheeler that we mean what we say." The weeks that followed established a pattern that would define Daniel's new life. Days that started early and ended late, consumed by the demands of the Meridian project and the two other smaller initiatives Patricia assigned him once she saw he could handle the workload. Team meetings and client calls, status reports and problem-solving sessions, the constant juggling act of managing timelines and budgets and personalities. It was demanding. It was exhausting. It was also exhilarating in a way Daniel had almost forgotten work could be. He was good at this, really good at it, and it felt incredible to be using his skills again, to be challenged and trusted and given opportunities to prove his worth. His team slowly warmed to him as he demonstrated competence day after day, as he backed up his promises with action, as he gave credit when things went right and took responsibility when they went wrong. The Meridian project turned around, not overnight, not miraculously, but through consistent effort and clear communication and the kind of steady leadership that moved mountains one shovelful at a time. By the end of Daniel's first month, they'd hit 3 consecutive milestones on time and under budget. Harrison Wheeler sent an email praising the turnaround and committing Meridian to a long-term partnership with Lexington Dynamics. Patricia forwarded it to Daniel with a note. "Well done. This is exactly what we hired you to do." But it was Evelyn's message that made Daniel smile. "I knew I was right about you." Life at home changed too, though more gradually. The first paycheck was surreal, more money than Daniel had seen in months, and it was just the beginning. He paid off their most urgent debts, bought Clara the art supplies she'd been coveting, took her out for a celebration dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins and a dessert menu. Small things, normal things, things that other families did without thinking twice but that felt like luxury to them. Clara's surgery was scheduled for late October, and as the date approached, Daniel found himself alternating between hope and terror. The procedure was supposed to help. Dr. Morrison was confident it would help. But surgery was still surgery, still risk, still his daughter on an operating table while he waited helplessly. He tried not to let Clara see his anxiety, but she knew anyway. Kids always knew. The night before the surgery, Clara couldn't sleep. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, holding her hand in the darkness, listening to her breathe and trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. "Dad?" Her voice was small. "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm still the same after?" "Then you'll still be you," Daniel said firmly. "Smart and brave and stronger than anyone I've ever met. This surgery isn't about fixing you, Clara. You're not broken. It's just about making things easier." "But what if something bad happens? What if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that Daniel knew was lurking in both their minds. The memory of another hospital and another surgery when Sarah had gone in for what should have been a routine procedure and never come back out. Daniel climbed into the narrow bed with his daughter, something he hadn't done since she was very small, and wrapped his arms around her. "Nothing bad is going to happen. Dr. Morrison is the best. The hospital is excellent, and you're tough as nails. But Clara, even if things don't go perfectly, even if the surgery doesn't help as much as we hope, we're going to be okay. We've survived worse than this. We've survived the worst thing that could happen to us, and we're still here, still fighting, still together." Clara curled into him, her thin body fitting against his side the way it had when she was a toddler and the world was simpler. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo, more than anything in this world." They fell asleep like that, father and daughter, holding on to each other against an uncertain future and choosing to believe that morning would bring healing rather than heartbreak. Outside, Bridgewater's lights glittered in the October darkness, and somewhere in a penthouse office, Evelyn Langford was still working, thinking about her own daughter and the man who'd saved her, and the strange ways that lives could intersect and change each other. Somewhere in a hospital, surgeons were preparing operating rooms for the next day's procedures, checking equipment and reviewing files, including one for a 9-year-old girl named Clara Mercer who deserved a chance to run. And in a modest apartment that would soon be replaced by something better, in a bed too small for both of them, Daniel held his daughter and let himself believe in possibility, in second chances and new beginnings, in the idea that doing the right thing might actually, finally, lead to something good. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges and fears. Tonight, they had each other, and for now, that was enough. The surgery waiting room at Bridgewater General was designed to be calming, soft blue walls, comfortable chairs, magazines nobody actually read scattered across side tables. But no amount of interior design could ease the particular terror of watching your child disappear through double doors into an operating room. Daniel sat with his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor tiles and counting the minutes that felt like hours. Marcus had come to sit with him, taking the morning off work without being asked, just showing up at 6 a.m. with coffee and the kind of quiet presence that good friends offered in moments when words were useless. He didn't try to make conversation or offer empty reassurances. He just sat there, solid and real, reminding Daniel that he wasn't completely alone in this. The last thing Clara had said before they wheeled her away was, "Don't forget to tell Sophie I said hi." Even facing surgery, even scared despite her brave face, she'd been thinking about the little girl Daniel had saved, the connection that had somehow transformed their lives. It was so perfectly Clara, generous and thoughtful even in her own moment of crisis, that Daniel had nearly broken down right there in the pre-op room. "She's going to be fine," Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "Clara's the toughest kid I know. She shouldn't have to be this tough. She's 9. Daniel's voice came out rougher than intended, thick with emotions he was barely holding back. 9-year-olds should be worried about homework and playground drama, not whether they'll ever be able to walk normally. You're right. It's not fair. But you've given her every possible advantage, the best surgeon, the best hospital, a chance she wouldn't have had a few months ago. That's what good parents do. They fight for their kids, even when the fight seems impossible." Daniel wanted to believe that, wanted to think that all the struggling and sacrificing and desperate choices had been worth it. But sitting in this waiting room, not knowing what was happening behind those doors, all his certainty crumbled into the primal fear that maybe the universe would take Clara away from him the way it had taken Sarah, that maybe happiness was always temporary and loss was always lurking just around the corner. His phone buzzed, a text from Evelyn. Thinking of you and Clara today. Surgery days are terrifying. I remember when Sophie had her tonsils out and I was convinced something would go wrong. But Clara has the best team in you. She's going to be okay. Then another message. Also, I'm in the main lobby if you need anything. Coffee, distraction, whatever. Just say the word. Daniel stared at his phone in surprise. Evelyn's here, he told Marcus, at the hospital. The CEO? Why? I don't know. But even as he said it, Daniel understood. Evelyn knew what it was like to be a single parent afraid for your child. She knew the particular loneliness of facing medical crises without a partner to share the weight. She was here because she understood, and because somewhere in the past months, a connection had formed between them that went beyond professional courtesy or gratitude. Do you want me to go? Marcus asked, already starting to stand. If you need time with her. No, stay. But maybe I should go down and say hi. I can't just sit here for 3 more hours, slowly losing my mind. The main lobby was crowded with the usual hospital traffic, visitors and patients, medical staff moving with practiced efficiency, volunteers at the information desk directing confused newcomers. Daniel spotted Evelyn immediately, sitting in a corner chair despite the expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked up as he approached, and her expression was soft with concern rather than her usual professional composure. You didn't have to come, Daniel said, sitting in the chair beside her. I know, I wanted to. Evelyn held up a cardboard carrier with 2 coffee cups. I brought reinforcements. The cafeteria coffee here is terrible, so I stopped at that place on 5th Street, the one that actually knows what they're doing. Daniel accepted the cup, and the familiar aroma was grounding in a way he hadn't expected. Thank you for this, for being here. You must have a million things you should be doing. Nothing more important than this. Evelyn studied him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see past whatever mask he was trying to maintain. How are you holding up? I'm terrified, Daniel admitted, because there didn't seem to be any point in pretending otherwise. I keep thinking about Sarah, about the last time I was in a hospital waiting for someone I loved to come out of surgery. She never did. What if... Don't go there. Evelyn's voice was firm, but not unkind. I know it's hard not to, but every surgery is different. Every situation is unique. Clara is young and strong, and Dr. Morrison wouldn't have recommended this procedure if she didn't believe it would help. Trust that. I'm trying. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping coffee that tasted expensive and watching the hospital bustle around them. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her tone careful. Can I ask you something personal? After everything, I think we're past the point of standing on ceremony. Fair enough. Evelyn traced the lid of her coffee cup with one finger, not quite meeting his eyes. How did you do it? After Sarah died, how did you keep going? Because I lost my husband 3 years ago, and some days I still feel like I'm just going through the motions, checking boxes on some list of things living people are supposed to do. Work, parent, breathe, repeat. But I'm not sure I've actually processed any of it. The question was so raw, so honest, that Daniel had to take a moment before answering. This wasn't the billionaire CEO asking. This was just a widow trying to figure out how to survive the unsurvivable. I don't know that I did keep going, he said slowly. Not in any meaningful way. I survived. I made sure Clara was fed and safe and loved. I went through the motions, like you said, but actually processing it, actually dealing with the grief instead of just running from it, I'm not sure I've managed that either. Some days I still reach for my phone to call Sarah about something before I remember she's not there. Some days I wake up and for just a second everything's normal, and then reality crashes back and I have to learn all over again that she's gone. Evelyn nodded, her expression distant. Michael used to make this terrible joke about how he'd haunt me if I ever replaced him with someone boring. He had very specific requirements for any hypothetical future husband, had to appreciate bad puns, had to let Sophie win at board games, had to understand that Evelyn Langford didn't need saving because she was perfectly capable of saving herself. Her voice cracked slightly. I keep thinking I should date, should try to move on, should give Sophie a chance at having something like a normal family again. But how do you move on from someone who understood you completely? How do you open yourself up to that kind of loss again? I don't have an answer to that, Daniel said. I've been too busy trying to survive to think about dating or moving on or any of it. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe I'm using Clara and work and the constant struggle as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own grief. But I don't know how else to do this. Maybe there is no right way. Evelyn finally looked at him, and in her eyes, Daniel saw the same exhaustion and sorrow he felt every time he looked in a mirror. Maybe we just do the best we can and hope that eventually it gets easier. Does it get easier? I'll let you know when I find out. They talked for another hour, trading stories about their lost spouses, about the impossible challenge of single parenthood, about the guilt that came from both working too much and not working enough, from being present and absent simultaneously. It was the kind of conversation Daniel hadn't had with anyone since Sarah died, the kind of vulnerability he'd learned to hide because people were uncomfortable with grief that lasted longer than an acceptable mourning period. But Evelyn understood. She lived in the same strange liminal space between moving forward and being frozen in the past, between honoring the dead and living for the people who still needed you. There was something almost healing about acknowledging that, about having someone who knew exactly what you meant when you talked about the particular loneliness of being the only parent at school events, of making decisions big and small, without the person who'd promised to share that burden. Marcus appeared in the lobby around 10:30, looking relieved to have found them. Dr. Morrison just called the waiting room. Surgery went perfectly. Clara's in recovery, and you can see her in about 20 minutes. The relief was so overwhelming that Daniel's knees went weak. Evelyn gripped his arm, steadying him, and her smile was radiant with shared joy. See? I told you she was tough. They went back upstairs together, the three of them, and when Daniel was finally allowed into the recovery room, Clara was groggy but smiling, her eyes unfocused from anesthesia, but finding his face immediately. Hey, Dad, she slurred. I'm bionic now. Got screws and everything. Daniel laughed and cried simultaneously, holding her hand and pressing a kiss to her forehead. How do you feel? Sleepy and sore. But Dr. Morrison said it went really good. She said I'm going to be running marathons. Clara's eyes drifted past Daniel to where Evelyn stood in the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. Is that Sophie's mom? It is. She came to check on you. That's nice. Clara's words were getting slower as the medication pulled her back toward sleep. Tell her thank you. Tell her wishes do come true sometimes. She drifted off mid-sentence, her breathing evening out into the deep sleep of healing. Daniel stayed by her bedside for another hour, watching her chest rise and fall, reassuring himself that she was okay, that the worst was over, that they'd made it through another crisis together. When he finally emerged into the hallway, Evelyn was still there, leaning against the wall with her phone in hand but not looking at it. She straightened when she saw him. She's good, Daniel said, and his voice broke on the words. She's going to be okay. I'm so glad. Evelyn reached out and squeezed his shoulder, and the simple human contact was enough to make Daniel's carefully maintained composure crumble. He pressed his hands to his face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and Evelyn just stood there with him, her hand steady on his shoulder, letting him fall apart in a hospital hallway without judgment or discomfort. When he finally pulled himself together, embarrassed by the display, Evelyn just smiled gently. You're allowed to have feelings, Daniel. You've been strong for long enough. Let someone else carry some of that weight for a minute. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. But maybe we could figure it out together. There was something in her tone, in the way she was looking at him, that made Daniel's heart do a complicated flutter. This was more than employer and employee, more than grateful mother and the man who'd saved her child. This was two people who understood each other's pain and survival, who'd found unexpected connection in the midst of crisis. I should get back to Clara, Daniel said, not quite ready to examine what he was feeling. But thank you for everything, for being here. Any time, Evelyn said, and she meant it. Clara's recovery was both faster and harder than Daniel had anticipated. The surgery had been successful, but the physical therapy was grueling. Daily exercises that left her exhausted and sometimes in tears. Small victories measured in degrees of motion and percentages of strength. Daniel rearranged his work schedule to take her to appointments, working early mornings and late nights to make up the hours. pushing himself to the edge of burnout to be both the father Clara needed and the professional Lexington dynamics deserved. Patricia noticed, of course. "You're going to crash if you keep this up," she told him one Friday afternoon when she found him still at his desk at 7 p.m. "Delegate more. Trust your team. You don't have to prove yourself anymore, Daniel. We all know you're good at this." "I just need to get through these next few weeks," Daniel said, rubbing his eyes. "Once Clara's through the worst of the recovery, things will settle down." Famous last words. But Patricia's expression was sympathetic rather than critical. "At least promise me you'll take the weekend off. No emails, no checking project status, nothing. Just be with your daughter." It was good advice, and Daniel tried to follow it. That Saturday, he and Clara had a movie marathon, working their way through her favorite animated films while she did her at-home exercises during the boring parts. She was getting stronger. It was visible in the way she moved, in the increased range of motion, in the determined set of her jaw when the exercises hurt, but she pushed through anyway. "Dr. Morrison says maybe I can try walking without the braces in a few months," Clara said during a commercial break, her tone carefully casual in the way of kids testing out hope they're afraid to fully embrace. "Like, not all the time probably, but sometimes." "That's amazing, sweetheart." "Yeah." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of me? For being brave about the surgery and stuff?" The question hit Daniel square in the chest. They didn't talk about Sarah as much as they probably should, both of them having learned to navigate grief by not poking at it too directly. But Clara needed to hear this, needed to know that her mother's love hadn't disappeared just because Sarah had. "Your mom would be so incredibly proud of you," Daniel said, pulling Clara close. "Not just for being brave about the surgery, but for everything. For how kind you are, how smart, how you keep fighting even when things are hard. You're exactly the person she hoped you'd become." "Do you think she can see us, wherever she is?" Daniel didn't know what he believed about afterlife and heaven and whether the dead watched over the living. But he knew what Clara needed to hear, and it happened to align with what he hoped was true. "I think she can. I think she's watching you grow up and being amazed by how incredible you are. And I think she's probably also telling me I'm doing okay, that I haven't completely screwed this up." "You're doing great, Dad." Clara tilted her head back to look at him. "Better than great. You're the best dad in the whole world." If there was a better compliment than that, Daniel couldn't imagine what it would be. The weeks rolled into months, autumn giving way to early winter, and slowly, life began to feel less like survival and more like actual living. Clara's progress continued, each physical therapy session building on the last, until the day Dr. Morrison declared that she could try going to school without her braces for half days, just to see how she managed. The morning Clara walked to the bus stop on her own 2 feet, wobbly but determined, Daniel had to turn away so she wouldn't see him crying. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of life, a 9-year-old walking to a bus stop. But it was everything. It was years of fear and hope and medical bills and desperate prayers, all culminating in this one ordinary moment that felt like a miracle. At work, Daniel's reputation had solidified from the guy who saved the CEO's daughter to the guy who actually knows what he's doing. The Meridian project had been such a success that Meridian had signed on for 2 additional projects, specifically requesting Daniel's team. He'd earned respect through competence, exactly as Patricia had said he would, and it felt incredible to be valued for his skills rather than his circumstances. But it was his evolving relationship with Evelyn that occupied Daniel's thoughts more than he wanted to admit. They'd fallen into a pattern of occasional lunches, professional meetings that somehow always extended past their scheduled times, into conversations about everything and nothing. She'd asked him to consult on a new initiative she was planning, which meant more time together, more opportunities to discover how well they understood each other. It wasn't dating. They were both too complicated, too cautious, too aware of all the reasons why mixing professional and personal was a terrible idea. But it was something that made Daniel's pulse quicken when her name appeared on his phone. Something that made him look forward to Monday mornings because he might run into her in the executive elevator. Something that felt dangerous and exciting and terrifying all at once. "You like her," Marcus said one evening over the celebratory drinks they'd finally gotten around to having. "And I don't mean professionally. I mean like her. We're not in middle school, Marcus. No, but you're blushing like we are. Marcus grinned over his beer. It's okay, to be interested in someone. Sarah wouldn't want you to be alone forever. It's complicated. She's my boss, technically, sort of. And she's Evelyn Langford, billionaire CEO. I'm a single dad who drives a 15-year-old Honda. We exist in completely different universes. You saved her daughter's life, and she gave you your career back. Seems like your universes are pretty thoroughly entangled already. Marcus turned serious. Look, I'm not saying you should rush into anything. You've got Clara to think about, and your career is finally stable, and there are a million good reasons to be cautious. But Daniel, when was the last time you let yourself want something just for you? Not for Clara, not for work, just for yourself? The question haunted Daniel for days afterward. When had he last wanted something for himself? Everything in the past 3 years had been about survival, about Clara, about making it to the next day and the day after that. Personal happiness had felt like a luxury he couldn't afford, something for people whose lives weren't held together with duct tape and determination. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it was okay to want things again. The realization came at the company's annual holiday party in mid-December, held in the Lexington Dynamics atrium that had been transformed into a winter wonderland of white lights and silver decorations. Daniel had brought Clara as his +1. Employees were encouraged to bring family, and she'd been delighted by the fancy party, the live music, the dessert table that looked like something from a magazine. Evelyn had brought Sophie, and the two girls had gravitated toward each other immediately, Clara showing Sophie her new walking skills, and Sophie introducing Clara to her friends from private school. They looked happy together, giggling over some shared joke, and Daniel felt a pang of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. They're adorable together, Evelyn said, appearing at Daniel's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. She handed him one, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. Sophie's been asking if Claire can come over for a play date. I know that's probably weird given that I'm your boss, but it's not weird, Daniel interrupted. Clara would love that. She talks about Sophie all the time. They stood side by side, watching their daughters, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that felt significant. The party swirled around them, colleagues laughing, music playing, the general festive chaos of a corporate celebration, but Daniel was acutely aware of Evelyn's presence beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume, the warmth of her arm almost but not quite touching his. "Can I tell you something?" Evelyn said quietly, her eyes still on the girls. "That day in the park, when Sophie nearly died, it changed my perspective on everything. Not just in the obvious ways, being more present, working less, but in understanding what actually matters. I built this company thinking success meant growth and profits and market dominance. But that moment when I got the call that Sophie was in danger, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was her." "I understand that," Daniel said. "When Clara was born, Sarah and I had all these plans for careers and houses and the life we were going to build. Then Sarah got sick, and suddenly none of those plans mattered. The only thing that mattered was time. Having more of it, using it well, not wasting a single moment. We're quite a pair, aren't we? 2 workaholics who had to nearly lose everything to figure out what we actually value." Evelyn finally looked at him, and in her eyes, Daniel saw the same complicated mix of fear and longing that he felt. "Daniel, I need to be honest with you. She gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is, it's becoming difficult for me to ignore. I find myself looking for excuses to see you. I care about your opinion more than I probably should, and I'm terrified because you work for my company and I'm your boss, and there are a million reasons why this is a terrible idea." Daniel's heart was hammering so hard he was sure Evelyn could hear it. "I feel the same way, all of it. The wanting to see you, the terrible idea part, everything." "So what do we do about it?" Before Daniel could answer, before he could even fully process the question, Clara appeared at his side, slightly out of breath from dancing. "Dad, Sophie wants to know if we can do a sleepover sometime. Can we? Please?" Sophie was right behind her, looking at Evelyn with the same hopeful expression Clara was directing at Daniel, and the 2 adults exchanged a glance that was part amusement, part resignation, part something else entirely. "I think we can arrange that," Evelyn said, and the smile she gave Daniel was warm enough to make his breath catch. The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with small moments that built on each other. Clara's play date at Sophie's house, which was less a house and more a mansion, but where the girls played with the same enthusiasm kids everywhere played. A coffee meeting between Daniel and Evelyn that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with two people trying to figure out if what they felt was real or just trauma bonding and gratitude wrapped in loneliness. It was Daniel who finally made the first real move. On a cold January evening when Evelyn had stayed late at the office working on quarterly reports and he'd been passing by on his way home. He knocked on her door, and she looked up from her desk with surprise and pleasure. "Working late again?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. "I could say the same about you." Evelyn glanced at her watch. "It's almost 8. Shouldn't you be home with Clara?" "She's at a friend's house for dinner. I'm actually off duty for once." But Daniel took a breath, gathering courage. "Have you eaten? Because I know this place that makes incredible Thai food, and I was thinking maybe we could have dinner. Not a work dinner, not a business meeting, just dinner." Evelyn's smile was slow and genuine. "Are you asking me on a date, Daniel Mercer?" "I'm terrified, but yes. Yes, I am." "Then yes. I'd love to have dinner with you." That first date led to a second, then a third, a careful courtship conducted around work schedules and parenting responsibilities, and the complicated logistics of two people rebuilding their lives. They moved slowly, both of them gun-shy and cautious, both carrying the weight of past loss and the fear of being hurt again. But slowly, carefully, something real began to build between them. Clara noticed, of course. She was 9, not blind. "You really like Sophie's mom, don't you?" she asked one Saturday morning over breakfast. Daniel considered lying or deflecting, but Clara deserved honesty. "I do. Is that okay with you?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, pushing cereal around her bowl. "Do you love her the way you loved Mom?" "No," Daniel said immediately. "What I had with your mom was unique, Clara. Nothing will ever replace that or diminish it. But people can love more than one person in their lifetime. Not the same way, but in ways that are still real and meaningful. Your mom will always be your mom, and I'll always love her memory. But that doesn't mean I can't also care about Evelyn." "Okay?" Clara met his eyes. "Because I like her too. She's nice, and Sophie's great. And you've been happier lately, like really happy, not just pretend happy. I think Mom would want that for you." "You're pretty wise for a 9-year-old, you know that?" "I'm almost 10, Clara corrected with a grin. "That's basically a teenager." Spring arrived with the kind of gentle warmth that made Bridgewater beautiful, trees blooming and the city shaking off winter's gray. Clara's physical therapy had progressed to the point where she was walking full-time without braces, still with a slight limp but mobile in ways that had seemed impossible a year ago. She'd joined the school art club and made friends, and was living the kind of normal childhood that Daniel had fought so hard to give her, and Daniel and Evelyn had fallen in love. It hadn't been a lightning bolt or a dramatic moment. It had been gradual, building through shared dinners and long conversations, and the slow revelation that they understood each other in ways that felt rare and precious. They still hadn't told anyone at work, wanted to keep it private until they were sure, until the complications of dating your boss or dating your employee could be properly navigated. But everyone seemed to know anyway. The way they looked at each other in meetings, the subtle shift in their dynamic, the fact that Evelyn smiled more and Daniel seemed lighter. Office gossip being what it was, theories abounded, but nobody said anything directly. Until Patricia pulled Daniel into her office one afternoon in April. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that my question comes from a place of protecting both you and this company," she started, her expression serious. "Are you and Evelyn Langford involved romantically?" Daniel's first instinct was to deny it, but Patricia deserved better than that. "Yes, we are." "How long?" "A few months. We've been keeping it quiet because we know it's complicated." Patricia nodded slowly. "Complicated is an understatement. You report to me, not directly to her, which helps. But she's still the CEO, and workplace relationships at that level of power differential can be problematic. Not just for you two, but for every other employee who might wonder if decisions are being made based on personal relationships rather than merit." "I know. We've talked about it. We're trying to figure out the right way to handle it. Well, you'd better figure it out quickly, because in about 2 weeks, we're announcing the new VP of Operations position that's been vacant since Victor Langston left, and Evelyn wants to offer it to you. Daniel stared at Patricia in shock. What? No, that's exactly the kind of thing that would make people think I'm getting ahead because of our relationship. That's what I told her. But Daniel, the truth is, you're the best person for the job. You've proven yourself over and over this past year. The Meridian Project turnaround, the 3 other major initiatives you've successfully led, the way you've built and managed teams, your VP material, relationship with Evelyn, or not. But the optics are terrible, and we need to address that head on. I don't want the promotion, Daniel said immediately. Not like this. Not when it would undermine everything I've worked for. That's noble and probably stupid. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Talk to Evelyn. Figure out what you both want. But Daniel, don't turn down an opportunity you've earned just because you're afraid of what people might think. You've spent the last year proving your worth. Don't throw that away. That evening, Daniel and Evelyn had dinner at her house. A regular occurrence now, the 4 of them, Daniel and Clara and Evelyn and Sophie, forming something that looked almost like a family. After the girls went upstairs to play, Daniel told Evelyn about his conversation with Patricia. I knew Patricia was going to talk to you, Evelyn said, not quite meeting his eyes. I should have discussed it with you first. But Daniel, you deserve this promotion. You've earned it through your work, not through our relationship. Nobody else will see it that way. They'll think I slept my way to the executive level. Let them think what they want. People are going to gossip no matter what we do. Evelyn reached across the table, taking his hand. But I understand your concern. So here's what I'm proposing. We go public with our relationship. Not splashy, not dramatic, just honest. We tell HR, we make sure everything is properly documented. We're transparent about the potential conflicts of interest. And then we let your work speak for itself. And if people still think it's favoritism, then you prove them wrong, the same way you've been doing all year. Daniel, I love you. I'm not going to hide that or pretend it doesn't exist just because it's complicated. But I also trust your competence. Take the VP position, show everyone what you're capable of, and we'll handle the rest together. It was the first time either of them had said, I love you, out loud. And the words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning and promise and all the complicated history that had brought them to this moment. I love you too, Daniel said, and meant it with his whole heart. The announcement of Daniel's promotion came with a carefully worded statement about his qualifications and achievements, and yes, a transparent disclosure about his relationship with Evelyn Langford that emphasized the professional protocols in place to ensure fairness. There was gossip, of course, and speculation, and probably some resentment from people who thought they deserved the position more. But Daniel's work continued to speak for itself. He built teams and delivered results, and led with the kind of steady competence that eventually silenced most critics. And those who couldn't be silenced didn't matter as much as the people who believed in him, Patricia and Marcus and his team members who'd seen firsthand what he was capable of. 6 months after his promotion, on a Saturday afternoon in the park where everything had started, Daniel organized a picnic for the 4 of them. Clara and Sophie ran ahead, Clara running, actually running now, her limp barely noticeable, squealing with laughter over some shared joke. Daniel and Evelyn followed more slowly, hands linked, watching their daughters play. Remember when I first called you? Evelyn said, her voice soft with memory. That night when I'd finally tracked you down and asked you to meet me? I was terrified, Daniel admitted. I thought you were going to offer me money to go away or make me sign something saying I wouldn't talk to the press. I probably should have. That would have been the sensible corporate response. Evelyn stopped walking, turning to face him. But I've learned that the sensible response isn't always the right one. The sensible thing would have been to keep my distance, to keep you as just an employee, to never risk my heart on someone again. But Daniel, you taught me something important that day in the park. You taught me that sometimes doing the right thing, the brave thing, means risking everything. Even when you can't see how it'll work out. Even when all the logical reasons say you shouldn't. I didn't teach you that. I just made a choice that seemed impossible not to make. Exactly, and so did I. When I chose to find you, to offer you a job, to let myself care about someone who'd already proved he had more integrity than anyone I'd ever met. I risked my professional reputation, risked being accused of poor judgment, risked my heart on someone who might not have been ready. But you were worth that risk. You are worth that risk. Daniel pulled Evelyn close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Claire was right, you know. That night before her surgery, when she said wishes come true sometimes, I wished for the chance to give my daughter a better life. I wished for stability and security and the ability to stop just surviving. But I never wished for this. For you. For what we've built together. This is better than anything I could have imagined. So what now? Evelyn asked, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his chest. We've both rebuilt our lives. We've both taken risks that paid off. What's the next chapter? Daniel thought about that question, watching Clara and Sophie playing in the distance, in the same park where this whole impossible story had started. He thought about second chances and new beginnings, about loss and love, and the strange ways that life could break you and heal you simultaneously. I think the next chapter is just living, he said finally. Not surviving, not fighting, just living, being present for our daughters, building our careers, being happy, together. That sounds perfect, Evelyn said, and when she tilted her face up to kiss him, Daniel tasted salt from tears he hadn't realized she was crying. Happy tears, the kind that came from releasing old pain and embracing new possibility. Clara and Sophie ran back to them, breathless and giggling, demanding that the adults come play their game. And as the four of them chased each other around the park, laughing in the golden afternoon sunlight, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, pure, uncomplicated joy. The kind of happiness that didn't come with caveats or fears or the constant anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was what he'd fought for. This was what his choice in that park had ultimately led to. Not just a job or financial security, but family, connection, love, a future that stretched bright and hopeful before them. Somewhere, Daniel hoped Sarah was watching and approving. Somewhere, Michael was probably making terrible jokes about Evelyn finally finding someone who could keep up with her. The people they'd lost would always be part of their story, always be loved and remembered, but they no longer defined the limits of what was possible. Life had taught Daniel that tragedy and triumph weren't opposite forces, but intertwined threads in the same tapestry, that loss didn't preclude joy and suffering didn't prevent happiness. You could grieve and love simultaneously. You could honor the past while building toward the future. You could carry the weight of what you'd lost while still reaching for what you might gain. And sometimes, if you were extraordinarily lucky, a single moment of impossible choice could set in motion a chain of events that transformed everything. A choking child, a missed interview, a deleted email, a mother's determination, a risky offer, two hearts learning to trust again. All of it leading here to this perfect ordinary moment in a park in Bridgewater, with his daughter running freely and the woman he loved standing beside him, and a future that felt, for the first time in years, like something to look forward to rather than something to simply endure. Daniel Mercer had stopped to save a stranger's child and lost everything. But in losing everything, he'd found something better, not just for himself, but for Clara, for Evelyn, for Sophie. He'd found that sometimes the universe did orchestrate things, that doing the right thing could lead to the right outcome, that wishes really could come true if you were brave enough to keep believing in them. The sun was setting over Bridgewater, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and as Daniel pulled his family close, because that's what they were now, a family built from loss and choice and stubborn hope, he let himself believe that everything they'd survived had been worth it for this moment, this feeling, this promise of all the good days yet to come. And somewhere in the city, in offices and homes and parks, other people were making their own impossible choices, risking their own everything for what mattered most, writing their own stories of loss and redemption and the strange, beautiful way that life could break your heart and heal it in the same breath. But that was their story to tell. This one, Daniel's story, had found its happy ending. Not an easy one, not without scars and